The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Good to be back.
Yes, it's nice to be back, Lysandra. And we didn't
haven't-
overlap. No overlap.
You didn't overlap, but then I just did.
I just overlapped with you. Darn it.
That's okay. It wouldn't be an internal recording if we didn't overlap.
Fair enough.
Well, I'm actually very excited for this episode, and I think I say it quite a bit, but this one I'm really interested to get both of your perspectives on. So today we're talking about 2023 energy and carbon trends. And now you both keep quite up to date with all the energy and carbon media. So with that in mind, what do you think will be the biggest energy and carbon trends or topics in 2023?
Let me start this, John?
You go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So what a freaking roller coaster. I think we talked about this briefly before we started, but in 2022, energy costs in North America, whether it's electricity or natural gas, even oil prices were pretty high. And since then, certainly the natural gas pricing, which has a huge impact on electricity, has dropped way below what was ever expected. And so what does that mean? That means now customers don't really care because energy pricing's really low, which in some ways is disruptive and trying to get customers interested in carbon because they were interested in carbon because energy costs were higher. I know the US government and the Canadian government have been really doing a lot. There was a recent announcement even yesterday from the Canadian government on spurring the carbon transition in the marketplace, and there's a lot of required investment or encouraging investment. I think they're trying to stir the market, but for some reason, the last month or two, there's been a malaise, at least we're feeling, in the marketplace on carbon. So it's just the cycle that goes on, but I do think, and I'm not trying to stir negativity, I think energy pricing will increase possibly later in the fall. If we have a hot summer, that will have an impact on gas pricing. And I think more and more discussion will go on carbon, where the transition customers will start realizing they have to move on with the transition. But that's kind of where I see things in the North American perspective. John, what's your take on Europe?
Well, the first thing is I want to object that we're having to future gaze, because we know in this industry, this sector, when you gaze into the future, you normally get it wrong. So I'm starting off with whatever we say today, we'll probably be wrong, but it's how we see what it is. And I was thinking about this, and I think there's two trends I think are going to be there. I think because there is no resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, I think that's going to sort of move on to more of a discussion and an issue about energy security, security of supply of energy. I think that will be there, because we know from a previous podcast when we had a guest that the Europeans, amongst others, have pumped masses of money into the system to sort of stabilize pricing and things like that. And as that kind of support is drawn back, it will bring the situation back into focus. I think a lot of people thought that, the disruption in oil and gas supply was because there was going to be this short-term conflict. And we don't see an end coming to that. So I think the situation that creates, we know, don't we, that events occurring in one part of the world where energy is involved ripple around the rest of the world. So I think that's going to continue to be a trend this year. The other trend is one, again, we were talking about this before we started recording the podcast, is we are noticing that there is a bit of an undercurrent of pushback on net zero. And I suspect we may see some of that growing. And again, I think with your comment, Dave, the falling of energy prices suddenly means, do we need to worry about that? Cost of living issues, everything else going on. I think there's that. I also think that we've got a problem that some of the statements and positions that have been taken on net zero don't stand up to scrutiny. And that in itself has perhaps devalued saying what net zero is. Well, I think we might get there. I think we might get people pursuing the sustainable future, but perhaps steering a little bit clear of some of the populist labels in it.
Yes. John, your conversation also stirs another thought that I think is happening here in North America because of some of the things that are happening with Russia, China. There's a lot of discussion about bringing back manufacturing here
Yeah.
in North America and friendly sharing of democratic countries working collectively. So I actually think manufacturing will have there'll be more discussions of industry and manufacturing in North
Yeah.
America than we've had for a long time. So that will be discussion. And then behind that is we're short labor or skill set to actually do the manufacturing. So that's going to be kind of challenging as well. So that will create innovation, or will stir innovation because they can't find the workforce to actually do the work, and they're going to have to find some type of solution.
Yeah, it's a good point there because I think all of us in the developed world have exported a lot of our manufacturing to China. Why? Because it was cheap. And I
Yes.
think now that we start questioning where does China sit in the global political situation at the moment? It's not with Russia, it's not against Russia. China's about China. And, they are wielding an immense amount of power by their control of manufacturing. And you're right. I think it goes on the back of that energy security one. If we're looking for security of supply, we remember when the Suez Canal got blocked and supplies couldn't get through from China. Is that something else we need to look at? Yeah, could be a trend.
Yeah, I want to highlight to our listeners, we are recording this at the end of Q1, and something I especially saw at the beginning of Q1 is a lot of experts mentioning that 2023 could be the start of an emissions plateau. So I know that that was a really big conversation at the beginning of the year. Again, media that you consume can change. I haven't seen too much about any numbers backing that since, but I am interested in seeing that topic later on in 2023. Also, something else that I think we do see daily or weekly is different companies mentioning their development in clean energy spending. A lot of the big organizations are announcing what they're doing to lower their carbon emissions, whether that be credits or adapting, clean energy or anything of that sort. And also, I guess it's more of a personal experience. I live across from Detroit, which is a big automotive industry. And being a recent engineering grad, especially, I have a lot of friends working for different OEMs in the EV space. So I am looking forward to seeing what comes out for electric vehicles at OEMs that aren't as loud about it in comparison to, let's say, Tesla, who is a primary EV company. So I am looking forward to seeing what our primarily gasoline OEMs do and what they're going to be announcing in the EV space.
It's interesting you picked that up because that leads to what's going to be, I think, here and there, a,
Mhm.
a, a talk issue and another issue is, and I'm hearing people talking about it now who are not in our space, and they
Yeah.
go, it's all very well having these EVs, how are we going to charge them?
Yep.
And I think that is certainly going to be something that's going to be a topic for the rest of the year.
And also, when we talk about carbon emissions, we're usually talking in the organization sense, but something that all listeners can relate to and all people is most of us, if you're not in a transit environment, you're driving a car, if you've been in a car, or you use a taxi or you use an Uber. So EVs are really going to be taking over, and it's something we're going to see every single day. Whereas when we talk about other things like, nuclear and, our solar and all that, not everyone can see those things. So I am curious to see what
Yeah.
people's opinions will be on EVs because it's a more open topic that everyone can comment on and understand.
But I think, again, if we're talking, just kicking this around a little bit, and I
Yeah.
can remember you talking about this, Italy. I'm not sure whether we recorded it or not, but if you're going into buying a vehicle at the moment, there is a price barrier because there are not many second-hand EVs, and EVs themselves, there's still quite a high entry level. And I think there is a bit of a polarization with, oh, it's trendy environmentalists who are driving around in their Teslas. For the rest of us, well, we can't afford to do that. So that's another piece of element of the stream that's going there. Is perhaps a topic is, how do we get low cost
Hmm.
EVs that everybody can get?
And even accessible, like to be transparent, I purchased a car end of last year and I was really hoping to get a hybrid. However, it was a 2 to 3 year wait for any of the hybrids that I actually wanted to consider. So I purchased a gasoline car because currently there I can't wait 2 years and I needed a vehicle and the used market wasn't worth it. So I am curious to see which automotive OEMs are going to be able to step up and meet the demand that is currently present for those hybrid and full EVs.
Definitely a topic for this year, isn't it?
Yeah.
EVs and what's associated around them.
We're kind of getting into, I think, question two, but staying with the same topic, like Ford is describing or suggesting that their electrification is a money loser, that it
Mm.
should be separated from their business model, that they can't, should be deemed as a startup, that they can't make money. And I know Elon Musk had kind of suggested that there's going to be a massive learning for these big car companies that are in typically ICE that are now moving to electrical. So we're going to hear a lot of that type of discussion. And clearly, in as far as media, we're also hearing now recent announcements in Canada of organizations coming to Canada. So, for example, Volkswagen is going to build a battery plant in St. Thomas, Ontario,
Mm.
which is a huge coup, I think, for the Canadian government to actually bring Volkswagen over, because I don't think certainly doesn't build anything in Canada. I'm not sure how much they do in the United States. So you're hearing this transition that's going on with electrification, specifically vehicles, but I think we're going to hear more and more discussions on how this transition, how manufacturing, it will be a role and play a key role in that whole piece.
Yeah.
Agreed. So, what trends did you think would be popular but are surprised by the lack of mention in media or industry?
I'll start with this one because you started with the last one, and this is a bit of a cheeky one. What I would like to have seen popular is something that should have been popular before and hasn't been, and it's how we treat the issue of energy efficiency. It's a massive one. The cheapest, least polluting kilowatt hour is the one we don't use. And at best, we get articles in, maybe, I don't know if it's been in the Globe and Mail and other papers, where 10 things you can do to say, help you. Oh, change your light bulbs, turn this down, do that. And that's not really what it's about. And I suppose I'm going to be blunt here. Energy efficiency hasn't got sex appeal. And, in general terms, it doesn't seem to be world changing. And yet it's a real fundamental. And I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not surprised. It's my disappointment that that's not it being picked up as it should be.
Mm. Dave?
John, I am in total agreement. The only thing you see on media here is typically supply options, like, whether it's renewables, wind or solar or SMRs, a small modular reactor, like that's all you hear. And I think it's because it's a capital-based money, big money, which gets people's attention. And you are so right, like this whole efficiency thing, and not only technical, but behavior improvements within an
Definitely.
organization and how it changes and makes the organization better. And no one picks it up. Like
Yeah.
it is disappointing. Now, it might be maybe disappointing because we do a lot of work in that area and we wish people would do more of it. And if media picked up, maybe other people would. But it is a big disappointment for sure. And I'm not sure if that's going to change. I think they go with the big headlines.
Yeah.
That would be my take. So I want to reinforce what John said. Lysandra, how about you?
Yeah, so I echo actually both of you. Mine was realistic actions to move towards a low carbon future. So I think, organizations and individuals jump to the extreme rather than, like John said, the cleanest kilowatt hour is one you don't use. So that's something that I'm surprised there's a lack of mention by. And also, at the end of last year, I think we've all talked about it, is all those fancy words that people were using. I'm going to be low carbon this or doing this. And I actually haven't seen too many of the fancy words quite yet. And I wonder if it's not the month for it yet. Typically it's towards the end of the year. So I expected a little more, some new carbon terms that I was going to read on LinkedIn or on the news and be surprised by. But so far, haven't seen any of that. And that was surprising to me.
So we need fancy words month.
We don't need it. I just thought we would see it.
Why don't we make a month that's fancy word? Like, let's do that on a podcast.
I'm sure we
Yeah,
have.
what we could do, we could come up with half a dozen expressions or so, let's say 10 of them, and 5 of them really mean something. The other 5 are just completely randomly generated, and see what people think of them.
Yeah, we have our listeners choose the 5 legitimate ones.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Have to get feedback. Yep.
Yeah.
So what are you excited for in 2023 in the energy and carbon space?
I believe what is going to transpire is, because the accounting and financial people are now more involved, is they will figure out, and it will start being tracked, on how climate change is truly impacting businesses' costs, and also they're tracking incremental revenue that they're achieving if they change their product. I think someone is going to start capturing that information and start making that public. And I think when that happens, then people start seeing that actually this is real and there's an opportunity and there's a risk. I am really hopeful that that type of information becomes transparent and starts being talked about in the marketplace. I really hope that happens.
Okay. What would really excite me in this year, I think, is, and it almost follows up, almost follows on from something you were saying, Lysandra, but we actually begin to see more actual delivery of promises. I think that's what's going to excite me this year, and I'll keep it simple that way. Delivery of promises, which might lead towards a real genuine tipping point with us on the carbon transition.
That's actually one of mine, John. So I have realistic targets being met, and again, that's what I think is going to be the biggest trend, and I really hope it happens because I'm excited to see those. I'm a big numbers person, so we can sit here and we can, talk about hypotheticals in 2030 and 2050, but I want to know in 2023, what have we done to improve and move towards a low carbon future?
Yeah.
Something else that I'm excited about, and it's an event, and I'm only excited about it because I'm excited to see John's reaction, but COP28. Every COP, I mean, now it's been every year it'll be 3 years in a row, right? John has great research that comes out of it and great opinions. So I'm excited to record that episode later this year and see what comes out of it.
Yeah, let's hope it's not a cop out.
All right. So what is our biggest takeaway for our listeners from this episode?
Okay, I think the biggest takeaway is, in fact, you can't predict the future. You've got to be open-minded. You've got to look at what's going on there, and blatant plug, continue listening to the 360 on energy and carbon, because we're trying to help you understand what's going on there and where things are going.
I actually think it's going to take literally 10 years before we actually see significant change. It saddens me because John and I have been working on this for so long, and you think things are moving along, and they do, and then they kind of stall out. But I think it's going to be full 10 years. I think change and leadership within company. I think that's what's going to happen. And so it's not going to be overnight that things are going to happen. It's just going to be gradual. But I'm going to say in 10 years, I think we'll reflect and go, wow, look at what all has been done. But so it's a journey. In summary, John, as one of our colleagues jokes, you and I say, this is a journey. This is not a fast thing that's going to be done. So
and he said, oh no, you're not using the journey word.
Don't use journey. Yeah, but it's a journey. Yeah,
it's going to require all of us doing something, some more than others. And I think you're right. It's going to take time. Without going sort of revisiting what we've talked about, one of the concerns is the concern, will 10 years' time be soon enough? Yeah.
Agree.
And that is a concern.
Yeah.
That is a concern.
So let's do something, well, if not today, tomorrow.
I think for myself, and I hope for our listeners, is we talk about these energy and carbon trends, what we see in media or the industry. I wish I held it more accountable. Like if I see something, I wish I followed up with it to make sure, oh, did that actually happen? Are those promises being met? So I think it's something to consume all this information, but it's another thing to actually follow up and not base your opinions or reactions on the initial statement, but make sure those organizations, businesses, media outlets are actually doing what they say they're doing.
Yeah, hold people accountable.
Thanks for a fun episode.
That was interesting. We could have done twice as long, actually.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we didn't, John.
Well, yeah.
All right. Talk to you next week.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Lacandra. Thanks, John.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn post. See you next week.